All right. If anyone's already here, awesome. Thank you for Yay Live. Exciting. Seems good there. And just getting confirmation, everybody, that we're streaming to all places necessary. All right. Hope everyone's having a good time. And if they're not, I hope you will. Excellent. Thank you all. And welcome, whoever is here right now. This is Six Elements' first online community event. We so deeply appreciate your presence and attention with us right now. This is a unique thing for Six Elements. As a live theater group, we don't usually venture this deep in the tech. And as such, this is a very new world for us. So as tech things come up, please exercise all the patience and love and joy that you have. And if you want to make some fun of it, every time we mess up tech, take a drink of water. Whoever has to go to the bathroom first wins, I guess. Before we jump in, I want to lay out just a little bit of what this actually is, because sometimes words aren't very good. So I'm going to give you more of them. First up, whether you're joining us in the evening, in the morning, or the amorphous twilight of the realm you're captured in, thank you for joining us. For those who don't know Six Elements, we're a company based in the Twin Cities of Minnesota. We focus on creating and sharing stories that follow the extreme moments of human experience, which we express through physical forms of theater, such as stage combat and stage intimacy. We strive not only to exemplify the highest standards of responsible storytelling, such as constant study of inclusivity practices and stage intimacy, but we also look to engender opportunities for our community to learn and grow with us through our educational initiatives. From sponsoring stage combat workshops to producing workshops on combat and intimacy, we are committed to finding ways to connect to everybody, whoever and wherever you are. And this community event is our new way to do that. Unlike a town hall, which you may have been at, which is more of like a forum, we're here to really focus on a specific thing that we're doing. And in this case, we have aspirations for a project in the future. With the pandemic changing how we organize the world around us, we are venturing into this kind of community share of a project that's in the making. Over the course of about an hour and 15, an hour and 20 minutes or so, I'm going to show you some recorded material that we have based off some excellent work that has come from our writing group through research and interesting explorations. And we even have a couple scenes that we would love to share with you as well in order to give you a sense of what this whole thing is going to be. But the most important thing of all that must be stressed, everybody, is that you, the audience, are the most important element to this, because live theater is intrinsically only exists within the mind of the audience and the relationship they have with the artists and actors. So this is a way we can assess how we're connecting with you. We want this to be the best version of this story possible. To quote Peter Hall, that guy who wrote The Empty Space, a person walks across the empty space while someone else is watching them, and that is all that is needed for an act of theater to be engaged. I don't know if anything tonight would be called theater, but it does show that you are an essential creative partner in this. So please engage with us, your imagination. This is live. I'm actually here right now with you with maybe 10 or 15 seconds delay. So wherever you're looking at this, please feel free, as it's going along, as I'm prattling, go ahead and put things in the comment section. I think someone's already... Oh, yeah, we got a welcome all going here. So please put things in the comment section that comes up, either reactions to what you're seeing, questions, confusions, any of that sort of stuff whatsoever. We're going to see it. If it's something small, we'll fire off something right there. But if it's something that's really interesting, so make them good, we can put that at the end where we'll have a live Q&A section with all the writers, all these people you're going to see in the pre-recorded video, so you have a sense of what we're aiming for and what we want to give to you. And you will help inform us of how we go forward. So with all of that stuff, I'm going to shut up for a little bit, and we're going to watch the first part of this. So everybody's going to see lovely old Mike Lepke's face. Boop. And we're going to take it away.
We're creating a show about historical European martial arts. Now, this is a system of fighting whose lineage of training is broken, and there's no parallel storytelling tradition. And we're doing it in a style inspired by the structures of East Asian martial arts epics, specifically those from Japan and China, martial arts that have a much more intact training lineage, and by extension, a more robust developed storytelling tradition. Our characters are drawn from the history of German and Italian fencing. Now, they conveniently enough don't have meticulously documented lives, leaving us room to create a narrative of our own. So, our story centers around a group of 5 characters pulled from the pages of history, specifically the list of members of the Society of Lichtenauer: Ringek, Danzig, Stettner, Ott Jude, or Ott the Jew, and Dietrich the Dagger Fighter from Brunswick. It's literally the name as it appears in the list. So these 5 are bound together by fate and purpose and a shared loyalty to the legendary swordmaster Lichtenauer as their mentor. They must travel across the Holy Roman Empire, nestled near both the fabled Black Forest and the towering Alps, and during their journey they will be pitted against forces looking to bring war to the lands that they call home. Some of them from neighboring kingdoms, like the great Italian swordmaster Fiore de Liberi, and others from within their borders, cloaked in shadow and springing from folk legend. Now, here's an important note. While we are pulling from historical personas, who were, as best we can tell, probably cishet white males, we are super not interested in that being the demographic we present when this show is in its final form. Throughout this process, we've been intentional about not gendering these characters, and as such, all of our scripting has involved they-them pronouns for our principal characters. Likewise, we're more interested in the racial makeup of these characters, more closely reflecting our contemporary American audiences than that of 14th century Germany. Basically, we want to present the show in a way that will make lovers of action and swordplay happy, regardless of where they're from, what they look like, how they identify. We are fine, however, with making Euro-Aryan fanboys real mad.
I do not believe that Mason knows that he is muted.
I'm not. Okay, thank you, everybody. I just spoke for a little bit. The short of it is, Mike speaks words way better than I do. Lovely that we could hear that. Thank you, everybody, for saying that. So, with that, you may be still not 100% sure of what this is on like just a grassroots, like what we're going to see. So, we're going to share one of the scenes we have written together. As a group, over many, many months of research and hard work and many painful rewrites and cuts, we've distilled some of this into example scenes, things that we think really represent all of that labor into something really fascinating and the direction this is going to go. Now, it may not exist in the final version of this play. It does give, I think, an honest taste of what we're aiming for. So I'm going to mute myself properly this time, and we're going to go ahead to watch the rest. Here we go.
Scene: Fangs on the road. The sun is setting over the tops of not-so-distant Alps. The mountain peaks are topped with pure white snow, under which a deep coat of mottled green forest covers the slopes to the base. Our band of 5, newly formed, trudge up the nearest hillock following the dirt path through the Black Forest to the township of Memmingen. Imposing trees to either side, but the road is well maintained and wide enough for 2 carts to pass each other. Danzig marches at the front, looking like the woodblock print of a leader of soldiers. Ringek is off a ways from Danzig's left, looking like an actual leader of soldiers, with a coarse gaze scouring the road for hidden threats. Stettner is alongside Danzig, navigating with a map and calling out upcoming topography. Ott trails them, looking at the passing forest in idle appreciation. Dietrich flits back and forth between Ott and Ringek, asking them long questions or telling long stories. Ringek only responds with one-word answers, while Ott patiently responds with a small smile.
Castle Verdenfels is another half-day's journey, and Memmingen is the last town of any size between here and there. We either stop here or reach the castle after nightfall.
What's the matter, Stetner? Have you lived at court for so long that you forgot how to sleep in anything but a bed?
We can rough it tonight, get close to the castle, sleep for a few hours, and then reach it just before first light.
Good time to scout. The light is perfect and the night guard's groggy.
Well, if we stop at the inn, we can get dinner, find out the lay of the land, see if anybody's heard anything. I've never met an innkeeper who didn't like to gossip.
It's the beer fumes.
And we look like travelers if we act like travelers. We feel around, see if we can find out if we're in the castle's territory yet, and whether we are or not.
The five crest the hill and see the town laid out below them, which is bustling with activity. However, as the five approach on the road, looks of fear are sent their way and warning calls go up in the town. Families hurry to rush inside, and suddenly, the streets are empty.
Strange. Last time I visited Memmingen, they welcomed me with open arms.
Looks like times have changed.
No marks on the doors to indicate a resurgence of the plague.
Okay, in case this is unfriendly territory, we're just a band of travelers.
Ooh, where are we going?
Roshberg, the first town on the other side of the castle.
To care for Ott's sick mother.
Oh, she's still so young. God defend her.
Why all five of us?
She was like a mother to us all.
Good enough. Stay close. I hear voices ahead.
Just beyond the town's thoroughfare, some few figures are gathered. A crowd of townsfolk, a traveler, injured and prone, and the town elder standing over them.
What the devil?
New plan, play it cautious. Stetner, with me. Ringek, Ott, hang back and be ready for trouble. Dietrich, cover us from somewhere.
Got it.
Hold! Stay where you are, strangers.
Do not fear, we're not thieves.
Are you of the Baron's forces?
The Baron?
We serve the King of Bavaria, no Baron.
The Baron comes. They come this way. Refugees are pouring in, but we don't know what to do. Our town has no defenses.
Wait, the Iron Baron?
Who's the Iron Baron?
That's impossible. They're a myth.
The townsfolk panic at Dietrich's sudden appearance.
Sorry, we are but simple travelers, and I was in the woods for but a pee.
They're a monster. I've heard them whispered about for years by travelers that visited my bar. A leader of a kingdom deep within the Black Forest, made of people who wandered into the woods, braved the monsters and the dangers found there, and tested in the fires of dragons, ghosts, and demons until they were made of iron. With the Iron Baron as the master of them all.
Impossible. How have I not heard of them at court?
Because they aren't real. They're the boogeyman stories that road thieves tell each other. If you wander too far into the woods, you'll meet the Iron Baron's forces and ne'er be seen again. Just a way to explain away people who got lost, or met a pack of wolves, or fell and broke their leg too far away to have their cries of help heard.
No. They're real. I've seen them.
Luca? My God, Luca!
You know them?
This is Luca. They're from my village.
What?
Luca, what happened?
They came. No warning. From the trees. Like shadow and fire. Fire and metal. There were sighs in the air, and we tried, but we fell. Ah. They killed everyone.
God.
I saw them. Oh, the Iron Baron with my own eyes. A dozen hands taller than any others on the field. Armor black as coal covering the face. They took a dozen wounds and they just kept fighting.
Where do you hail from, friend?
From Ulm.
Ulm fell? That's no small hamlet.
Nearly 300 souls.
How came you south? Why?
We fled. The south was the only way open. They picked at us as we went. We reached a village. We tried to warn them, but Baron was right on our heels. That's some of us kept going. We were joined by others, picked at again, reached another village, running. We had more time to warn them, but it didn't help.
Let's get you inside and let you rest.
Right, yes, of course.
The town elder gathers the traveler and moves them into the nearest building. The band of 5 are left alone.
It doesn't make sense.
No, it doesn't.
If that army is so fearsome, how did they escape?
Really? You don't see it?
See what?
They didn't escape. They're being herded.
Oh, God.
What? What does that mean?
Like trapping a rabbit. If you just chase it, it goes anywhere. You can't catch it. But if you leave it one obvious best escape route...
And put the trap there.
Rabbit stew.
That's why we haven't heard of these attacks. Why the capital has seen no refugees. Their army moves out in a straight line, probably through the woods to go unnoticed, then sweeps backwards and grinds up everyone along the way.
And anyone who escapes is driven toward Castle Verdenfels.
Their stronghold.
We have to move now, double time the entire way.
And what are you doing?
We have to keep moving. If their main army is on the march, then this is the perfect time to strike at Castle Vandenfels.
We'll have to move in the woods just off the road, otherwise we risk meeting scouts.
Now hold on!
What?
We have to help these people!
Might I remind you of our timetable?
That's right. There's a town of living people here about to be stormed by an army bent on their destruction.
And what are we 5 to do against an entire army?
They won't send the entire army. 5 real fighters could drive them away.
Only for a larger force to simply return and finish them off.
But then they would have time to prepare. We could at least give these people the decency of a chance to die another day.
Why is that decent?
Why? Because I've lived among people like this. They can be fighters, I've seen them, help them fend off a wolf or a bandit, but bloodthirsty marauders set upon them with little warning. Wooden pitchforks and their grandfather's swords will do nothing against that. They'll be slaughtered.
Odd, there are 1,000 such villages throughout this land. If we stay, maybe we save this one. But if we rescue Lichtenauer, we strengthen Bavaria and give all villages a weapon to fight back.
How can we defend every village if we won't even defend one?
If we stay, chances are we'll be killed. But let's say we aren't. Let's say we live, save the village, convince the army to pass it by. Where does that army go? To the castle. And to save Lichtenauer, we face a force twice as large. Perhaps this band is intended to reinforce the castle or to take Lichtenauer away to another location.
Lichtenauer will manage without us.
Are you seriously arguing that we leave Lichtenauer to rot in a cell? That we leave him to die? If this village is pressed by a force of any size, they will break and flee, and it will be a massacre.
Lichtenauer is valuable to them, or they'd already be dead. Another day or two will make them less valuable. They'll still be there, but a day or two here will save lives.
No. We move forward to the castle to rescue Lichtenauer. The plan was always the same. Sneak in, get Lichtenauer, sneak out. If we join this village, face an army in open combat, we die. It doesn't matter how good we are, we die.
Danzig? What say you?
Enough talk. We don't have time for this anymore. This army is advancing here, and when people fight, somebody dies. It's more likely to be these villagers. They should run. That is their only option. We should move and strike now before their main force returns.
Ringek turns and exits. Stettner starts to but hesitates and looks back. Dietrich and Ott stand tensely on the road through Memmingen. Danzig stands between the groups.
Danzig, We have to. We cannot focus on the details or we will lose this war and so much more.
You are so sure Lichtenauer alone can save this country?
We cannot afford to let Lichtenauer's knowledge fall to an enemy. Even with all 5 of us, we could not guarantee these people's safety, and without time to fully train, their lives are destroyed regardless. I wish there was another way.
You are a coward.
We are only 5. If we split apart now, we'll be less. But together we can complete our objective and... who knows, maybe we could split them up, diverting the army? If we save Lichtenauer but makes a noise while we do it...
It won't stop.
They might.
It won't.
At best, half these people are dead if we stay. But if Lichtenauer dies, then everyone dies.
I do not care for your math.
Ott goes to Dietrich, putting a hand on their shoulder.
Dietrich, we have to go.
No, Ott, these people!
We don't have time or the numbers to defend them properly, but we might still do them good by finishing the mission we started and going to Lichtenauer.
Deeply frustrated, Dietrich exits swiftly. Stettner follows just as the town elder returns.
Where are they?
We can't stay. I'm sorry. Gather your people and flee, all of you, right now. Leave valuables behind, leave livestock behind, take your lives and hide in the forest.
But this town is our lives. How could we survive the coming winter without shelter or food?
Split up. No more than one family in a spot. Make them look for you. They won't look for long before they move on.
Don't. You're just giving them false hope. It's better to be truthful.
Run for the woods. Take what you can and go. We can't help you, but you can still help yourselves.
Are you certain?
I'm certain. Go.
May God bless you and keep you safe.
That is a lie, and you know it. There's no way that army will leave without everyone dead.
I'm sorry, Ott. I am, but if I didn't choose to go to the castle, no one would listen to a decision I made ever again. I can't lead the unwilling.
Lead! Ringek left Danzig. Dietrich and Stettner saw you hesitate. You've already lost your command. We're dooming these people for the sake of your ego. Oh, but look on the bright side. Perhaps that army will be so slowed down, hunting and slaughtering them, that they'll have plenty of time to rescue one old hermit so you can be told what a good student you are.
Ott storms away. Danzig gives one last look back at the town, and then follows.
Woo! That's one scene down! This was such an incredibly gratifying thing to do, not only with the writers to help create the structure of the scene, but also to enlist some fantastic actors that you all just saw. Our heroes comprised of Leona Gardella, Montgomery Davis, Alec Barber, Bill Gordon, and Rodney Rice as our adventuring company. And then we had Dave Schneider join us later as the creaky town elder, and Ariel Bagley ended up joining us at the end as the traveler Luca. You're going to see those two last names a couple more times. There was so much work that took for us to get there, because this is a very democratic and group-oriented type of activity, which if anyone's done any writing knows group activities are the worst sometimes. So in order to share just what's underneath the hood, we're going to peel back the creative curtain and take you down a journey through the past of what we've done over the last year, seeing some of the research areas that we've got through to help inform this. To outline the process that we're following and kind of creating as we go, we're going to hear a little bit from Mike Lubke, who not only is a fight director within the Society of American Fight Directors, he is also one of the founding company members of Six Elements. So, past Mike, please take it away.
Tonight's event marks the culmination of the first of 3 phases of our development process for this new show we're working on. Now, this multi-stage process isn't entirely new to us at Six Elements. We've done similar things before. But we're doing things differently enough this time around that we thought we'd like to share with you, our community, kind of what we're doing, how we're doing it, how we're going about it, and what our process is like, so you can understand what this evening is in context. So, that being said, here's a loose outline of kind of how we've benchmarked the different stages for ourselves. Phase 1 of this process culminates in a story. Phase 2 culminates in a script, and Phase 3 culminates in a production. Now, we've done multi-step development processes for our devised works before. Both Valhalla, Tales from the Hall of Heroes, from our 2012 season, and 2018's The Hound of Kulin had processes that looked very similar to what Phases 2 and 3 are in our current model. Focused on adapting a pre-existing legend or myth into a staged production. Now, this show presents a unique challenge because there's no pre-existing narrative for us to adapt. There's no pre-existing story. Instead, we had narrative structures from multiple storytelling traditions of martial arts epics, as well as some historical characters for us to adapt, and the teachings on martial arts that those people put out into the world. And we're looking to fuse that all together into a story somehow. So as a result, we had the thrilling opportunity to decide what we wanted the story to be. Who would it be about? What challenges would they face? But more than that, we got to dig into what messages we wanted to send, what themes we wanted to highlight, what values do we want to reinforce as we attempt to forge a new legend in the style of old legends that is purpose-built to serve our current cultural moment. Now, the story we're working on tackles relevant themes like collectivism versus individualism. How do we value knowledge? Is it better protected or shared? How does the role of a teacher fit in with those values? What is the relationship between ignorance and fear? We tackle and we look at the generational transition of power and responsibility. I mean, I could go on and on, but there's a lot more we want to share with you tonight, so I will just leave it at that. Mason?
Mike? That was a joke for me, I guess. So at this point, we're going to dig into a little bit of some of the research and inspiration and things we wanted to share with each other as we were going through. The conversation was pretty loosey-goosey for a long time as we were trying to source through and figure out what were things that really were connecting to us. So we, for the purposes of sharing, have split it up into some rough bins. We're going to have 4 categories of stuff we're going to share with you. Each of those are going to be presented by some of our writers, excitingly enough. The first one, we're going to look at storytelling structure. Is this framework we talked about from Eastern storytelling and overall storytelling tropes and ideas, which we're going to hear from our beloved Dave Schneider. If he's not beloved to you yet, he will be. Take it away, past Dave.
To create this new story, we obviously needed characters. But where to start? Since we wanted to incorporate this idea of a teaching lineage, it obviously makes sense that we would need a teacher, a trainer, an old master. This is a character trope that we're all familiar with, existing in both our Western entertainment and East Asian stories. Probably in all cultures, really. We see them in epic hero myths as well as stories of team-ups, so it seemed natural to continue working with tropes. We'll get into the old master specifics a bit later on, so we'll proceed to the characters that you just witnessed in this scene, the heroes. Now, you might be asking yourself, wait a minute, archetypes, tropes, aren't those just terms for stock characters? At first glance, yes. So why would we want to use these archetypes? A short quote from Gore Verbinski, director of Pirates of the Caribbean, sums it up pretty well. I just watched so many Westerns as a kid that you end up using archetypes because there's a language there and you can twist it and turn it on its head. By using these archetypes, we hope to find a common ground with our audience from which we can twist and turn to create a dynamic story. And maybe we felt a little bit lucky. Now, what are these archetypes? You're probably already familiar with archetypes in stories. Have you heard of any of these? Captain Planet, Voltron, Robotech, more Robotech, Gatchaman, Avatar, Teenage Ninja Turtles, Star Wars Rebels, Scooby-Doo? How about these? Power Rangers, okay, all the Power Rangers, the A-Team, Hawaii Five-0, Torchwood, heck, even the Facts of Life and the Babysitter's Club. How about cinema? Okay, Harry Potter, 13 Assassins, Avengers, 3 Outlaw Samurai, Star Wars, 7 Samurai. And for you gamer types out there, what's your character class? My point is, you can probably already identify some of these archetypes. So let's do that. We have the leader, often the focal point of the story, but not necessarily, usually the one to take the most responsibility for the decisions of the group. The lancer, the loner, usually the one to offer counterpoint to the leader, and possibly even violently so, most likely to go their own way and splinter from the group. The smart one, offering thoughtful, considered viewpoints, often coming up with logical or scientific solutions to problems the group encounters. The brawn, often the largest, most physically imposing, but sometimes the most skilled. They're the one you want covering your backside as you escape. And the heart, the emotional center of the group, keeping the peace, relating to those outside the group, and in general, a moral compass when things get out of hand. Now, a lot of those titles I ran through may fit perfectly. Some may be a loose match, some are even combinations. The point is that these are recognizable characteristics. Now, we decided on 5 as it is the most common, the 5-member band, as it were. Why 5? The 5-member band can be traced, some would speculate, to the 16th century Chinese epic Journey to the West by Wu Shengyin. Journey to the West is a 100-chapter story about a Buddhist monk who travels west to obtain sacred texts. Along the way, he meets 4 others. Yes, the horse is a character, who help him, or rather save him in half of the chapters. Each has their own unique traits and personalities, and thus the beginnings of specific 5-character groups. But we wanted more to go off of than these archetypes. So we used some other Chinese and Japanese influences, the 5 elements. Here we see the Chinese elements, or Wu Xing, wood, fire, earth, metal, and water. We use these to try to develop external character dynamics. How does the fire character deal with an argument with the earth character? How does water relate to wood as they travel through the countryside, and so on? From Japan, we pull the Godai, earth, water, fire, wind, and void. We use these as internal character traits. How does earth deal with an obstacle? How does wind feel about the struggle of the peasant? The void, for those interested, is sort of a pure energy spirit or potential. These 5 elements are also common ground. You may be familiar with phrases like down to earth, hot-tempered, cool as ice, clear of mind, and for all you Patrick Swayze fans, she's like the wind. So hopefully the twists and turns that we use for our characters and their story will all still have some basis in what our audience is familiar with. But we also want to challenge our audience by setting our story within a culture they may not be familiar with. Brian Watson-Jones will tell us about some of the stories within that culture.
Thank you, Dave. The time and place where our story occurs is late medieval Germany. Germany here being a somewhat inaccurate term since the nation of Germany wouldn't exist for centuries, but we'll call it by its modern name because that makes it easier for us to picture. Now, even casual fans of mythology likely know that this area of Europe is rich ground. This was the same area that the Grimm brothers traveled, after all. The Grimms traveled the land, speaking to storytellers in every tiny village and hamlet they came across. In much the same way, Johannes Lichtenauer, the one who our band of 5 were traveling to rescue, who we will learn much more about in later presentations this evening, he had done the same. Only, while the Grimms were collecting stories to make a unified book of Germanic folklore, Lichtenauer was accumulating fighting techniques to make a unified combat style. The other major difference is that of timing. Lichtenauer lived 3 or 4 centuries before the Grimms, so the stories told in Lichtenauer's time would have been similar to the ones we know, but more primitive, more simple, while still being based in the darkness and fear of a Black Forest night. These would be the stories of ghosts and elves and goblins and kobolds, wingless dragons who drag themselves through the forest, Alps, blood-drinking, incubus-like creatures whose name is still the prefix for the German word for nightmare. Seen here with friends, a horse-like being who is possibly a Kelpie, and the distressed woman from every painting ever. Erdhennes, spirits of households who appear banshee-like to warn of a death in the family. This image is not a mistake. They actually appear as gray hens. Nature spirits, like the Askafroa, wife of the ash tree, who was sacrificed to every Ash Wednesday, lest her wrath fall upon us. Or Christmas beings, like the Perkta, who roamed the countryside during the 12 days of Christmas. Many of you were likely expecting me to bring up Krampus. Well, the Perkta is who Krampus wishes he could be. For good children, she'll hide a silver coin in their shoe or pail. For bad children, she'll cut a hole in them, pull their guts out through it, and then stuff that hole with pebbles and straw. Happy Christmas from the Belly Slitter. The Iron Baron our band of 5 discovered in the scene is an invention of the production, but very much of a type found in the period. The Baron is a bandit king who's gathered the worst of people who live in the wild woods and turned them into an army, like a mix of the Horseman War from Revelations and the leader of the Wild Hunt. The Wild Hunt might be the most universal folklore story of Europe. Told in Germanic lands, England, Scandinavia. It's a cursed band of demons and malevolent spirits who hunt dire animals or guilty humans or innocent humans or whatever humans they run across as they ride. The Wild Hunt is found in many modern retellings, from The Witcher to Hellboy to Bad Hellboy. The hunt is led by a cursed count who hunted in life, or by Wodan, or Herne the Hunter, or by Krampus, or any of a half dozen other names in a dozen variations of the story. The leader doesn't matter. The hunt matters. And if it marches as an army, it foretells a war. This is the background of the world in which our story will take place. Folklore is the underpinning of every society, so that even if it isn't spoken of from day to day, the feeling permeates what people decide to do. This is true whether we're talking about an off-hoker shape-shifting into the form of an animal to jump on your back and tear out your throat, or a young boy chopping down a cherry tree and then owning up to it. A young boy with a weirdly old head. But we're not just telling the story here. We're staging a story, presenting it through the actions and voices of people in the world. And so it's important that the existence of the folklore backdrop not be treated one-dimensionally. We don't want to make the villagers who tell the stories seem like superstitious idiots, scared of pixies and boggarts. They were dealing with harsh, dangerous lives on the edges of human society. They needed stories, both to warn them of the hazards they could do something about and distract them from the ones beyond their control. So we'll be treating them less like the pitchfork-wielding villagers from the background of a Frankenstein movie, and more like the lumberjacks of the late 19th and early 20th centuries in North America, making up tall tales around the campfire. Paul Bunyan, the Splinter Cat, the Hide Behind. On some level, the stories all know that these monsters aren't real. Sometimes they even knew exactly who had invented them. But at night, in the woods, when you hear a branch break, it's easier to believe. And everyone knows someone whose cousins, friends, fiance broke a twig on an ash tree, didn't make restitution, took ill, and died. even if none of it's real. Better safe than sorry.
Woo! Go stuff. This is incredible, right? Between Dave and Brian, we're seeing some of the sources that really helped us guide the creation of not only our motorcycles outside, not only our heroes that we'd seen earlier, what are the archetypes that they could interact with each other, but also the sources for this antagonism that we're starting to get the hint of, this ominous veil that's starting to overcloud everything that's happening. Super exciting. Now let's get a better sense of the setting. Yeah. And for that, I'm going to ask us to go back in time, go back to the future 4. There will be blood, with Ariel Begley and Nathaniel Nesham Case tag teaming this. Incredible. And pause Mason.
Hello and welcome to the 14th century. Everything is terrible. When going into the research for this show and exploring this amazing time period, I was brought back to my time in college studying this century. By almost any standard, the 14th century was a calamity. War, famine, disease, economic decay, political chaos, spiritual crisis, and social unrest dogged the whole century. Fear that the world was coming to an end again became widespread, and perhaps for the first time ever, those fears were not entirely irrational. That is how the first chapter on the 14th century in my medieval European studies college textbook begins. Lichtenauer's world was one of extreme shifting tides, a society in the midst of a massive overhaul with no foreknowledge yet of where it might go. To understand the legacy that Lichtenauer's work left behind and what kind of story may have led to it, you have to first know a few things about the state of the world at the time. So let's walk it through. First, starting out, year 10,000s, times are pretty flippin' good. Times are great. Population is increasing. It was a time of general prosperity. A banking system and a wide network of merchants and artisan guilds are created. Fairs are invented for the first time. Who doesn't love fairs? Those are becoming increasingly a staple for the merchant and trade industries. The population positively booms. Europe's entire population triples between 1050 and 1300. Growth was widespread, and it was certainly populations within cities that escalated the most, really becoming these booming centers of population growth. Then we hit the 1300s, or what I like to call the doom zone. And this right here, that is where the events of our story take place. But before you can understand what it's like to live in the 1380s, you've got to know a little bit more about the years leading up to it. So kicking off the century, we've got climate change setting in. Europe's average annual temperature dropped 2 degrees Celsius over the course of the 14th century. It may not sound like much, but as we are all beginning to see in our own century, even a single degree of average temperature change can massively affect the tentative balance of our ecosystem. So it's a bit of a rough go. Then in 1311, we get the Great Famine hits. This crisis first hits the Mediterranean in 1311 and lasts for 3 years there. But then in 1315, there was a 7-year run of terrible crop yields in the north. And this was because first, they had 2 years of overall incessant rain, plus the overall cooling climate, see, again, climate drop. There was the overall cooling climate. And then worst of all was the unfortunate timing of a shift towards creating a single crop for export and cash sale, more than the self-sustaining production that had been more common at the medieval manors before, which had more of a variety. So, of course, in this time frame, when that one crop failed, people just starved. There weren't backup options. Suddenly, this population growth of the years before was no longer a boon, it's become a heavy burden. There just isn't enough food to go around for a population so much larger than just 100 years before, and is also in the midst of a devastating rash of famine and ill luck and climate change. Many who had animals had to resort to slaughtering their own stock in dangerously high numbers, which only furthered the effect of the famine and led to more food scarcity for years and years to come after the actual famine ended. Then, on May 24th, 1337, the Hundred Years' War begins. This is perhaps one of the most well-known wars of this time period known to us today, but it is certainly only one of many wars happening during this time frame. For those of you who don't know, the Hundred Years' War is a long series of conflicts between England and France over the succession of the French throne, which lasted for 116 years. Which, if you think that's bad, there's a whole lot of more war coming your way. Throughout this time, war is sought by the kings of the land, and it's sought because they are seeking to broaden or protect their borders, by peasants uprising against political oppression, by royal family feuds that come to bloody ends. There's an ongoing fight amongst the papacy of the church to put a huge split in the heart of the religious and spiritual of people of this time as well. So as you can see, our little timeline here starts to get a little crowded once you actually start to look at the battles as they lay out one of the most conflict-driven centuries in our history.
Before we allied all of those wars into a single block in our minds, I want to pick one out of the mix. In 1314, the Holy Roman Emperor, the ruler of nearly all of Western Europe from the edge of France over, died. Of the 7 electors who were supposed to pick the next emperor, 4 voted for the Duke of Austria, and at a different meeting the next day, 5 electors voted for the, spoilers, eventual emperor, Louis IV, which, if you do the math, means that 9 out of 7 electors voted. 2 people were claiming to be the king of Bohemia. 2 people claimed to be the elector of Saxony. Louis IV's own brother voted against him, and the result of the contested election was a civil war. You got to be careful with those contested elections. Another wrinkle, the Holy Roman Emperor was supposed to be voted on by the electors and then confirmed by the Pope. In 1314, there was no Pope. When the next Pope was finally instated 2 years later, he refused to confirm the election. And when the Civil War was over and Louis IV refused to release his deposed rival from prison, the Pope excommunicated him. The ruler of the Holy Roman Empire was excommunicated. Louis even tried to set up his own rival pope. In 1346, the Pope and the disgruntled among the electors struck back by electing Charles IV as a rival to Louis. And a longer civil war was only avoided because Louis died of a stroke the next year in October of 1347. So finally, there was a little bit of peace. Things were looking a little bit up for the Holy Roman Empire, right? Nothing bad is going to happen to Europe in November of 1347.
Of course not. Nothing bad's gonna happen in November of 1347. You know, famine, constant war, economic collapse, so political and spiritual unrest just wasn't enough. I guess in November of 1347, there was this one little hiccup. The Black Death strikes Europe. So maybe it wasn't such a great time after all. Let me tell you about the Black Death. In November of 1347, the Black Death appears for the first time in Messina, Sicily. By December of that year, just a month later, the expansion was obvious, particularly hitting all of those major city centers, which, as was discussed earlier, are population booming central spaces. But when you hit that space with a big old plague, it becomes a lot more complicated real fast. From there, year after year, from 1347 to 1350, the effects of the Black Death continue to spread. The various kings and leaders and governments had little to no guidance to offer. Although the problem of this plague was a living nightmare for both the poor and the rich and powerful alike, it was still a matter for mostly prayer to cure rather than any leadership or legislation or guidance. It's no CDC in Middle Times. There is no way to have an exact count, but most estimates say that it claimed at minimum 35 million people in less than 3 years, approximately 1/3 of the entire population of Europe. Other estimates put the death toll even higher at 75 million or more, a 50 to 60% death rate. Possibly half of the entirety of Europe was killed in this 3-year span. This painting is one of the earliest known images of the plague. It's drawn in 1349 and it shows people carrying coffins of those who died of the illness in Tournai, a city which is now Belgium. It's hard to imagine the horror that they must have felt as this new disease, which was carried by rats, passed by contact with the diseased, or even by touching the possessions of someone who had been sick. And then once they contracted the disease, the infected person would essentially become covered in painful black boils that oozed pus and would vomit blood nonstop for about 3 days until they died. All of this is to say nothing of the fact that for these same 3 years, there was also essentially no commerce, no trade, no economic activity, and no movement of any kind. So either way you slice it, times were bad.
Emperor Charles IV, who began his uncontested rule as the plague began, ruled for 30 years, long after the plague had finally faded. On his death, the electors could not decide a new Holy Roman Emperor, and they failed to do so for over 50 years. The empire was fractured, with the land patchworked by the claims of the various ruling houses, as evidenced with this image. Internal wars abounded. For example, in 1385, the year before we have set our show, the Duke of Austria and Carinthia, the overlord of everything yellow on this map, tries to annex Switzerland and dies in battle, and his son William the Ambitious, yes, that is his moniker, has to share rule of his new dukedom with his uncle.
So, what does all of this tell us about the world that Lichtenauer lived within? We know it's in many ways a very scary and tumultuous time. It is rife with death and the collapse of old systems and institutions. We know a mythical spiritualism and an apocalyptic view of the world was taking hold in people's hearts. Imaginations are ready to be filled with fantastical stories of spirits and fearful wild things. We know that the humanist movement is finding its footing in Italy, and new ideas are laying the groundwork for an Italian Renaissance, one of many cultural revolutions on the horizon. We know that Lichtenauer is a master of swordplay, and in 1386, that puts us right smack dab in the middle of a century-long war central. Lives lived in extraordinary times such as these are often filled with danger and hardship, but also great opportunity. The empire was as divided as ever, and the Renaissance that was beginning in Italy had yet to take hold, and possibly the most important vassal the princes of the realm could have was a really good soldier.
Yeah, history. Huh. This is so great. So now, along with Ariel and Nathaniel, we have a better idea of the worldly concerns and the huge events that these characters would have been living under. So we all have a better sense of maybe how a world-altering event may inextricably change the lives of some people. Maybe you have a slightly better idea of that now. Cross-sectioning that with the myths and tropes that we heard about earlier of real people at those times, we can start constructing an idea of maybe what these people could have known as their own reality.
But Mason, where's the stage combat? Aren't you a stage combat company?
Oh, hey, great question. Thank you, whoever's in the audience there. Yes, we are in fact a stage combat company. That is a thing we do. So in order for us to parallel some of the storytelling structures here, in which, for instance, we find things like the sage-like character who is a hermited martial arts master, we're going to go ahead and look at what swordplay, at least a glimpse of it, may have been actually like, and some of the people who really espoused it throughout history. Let's next hear from who? Mason Tire. Oh, golly. All right. Well, we'll see how this goes.
Now that we know about the legends and lore that inspired us, along with the hot mess of geopolitics in late medieval Europe, it's time to learn about the real sword masters at the heart of this epic in the making. As you can predict, history is a bit more complicated than what we thought it was. In truth, we started grounding this story by looking for two pivotal sword masters in history, so then we could build a legacy, an adventure around them. But as we continue going along, developing the stories and themes, we found it was much more riveting to follow the students of these sword masters. So then we really did have to dig back in time and figure out historically who these people were, dice the fiction from the fact. And it turns out, there's a lot of fiction. Without getting you all lost in the weeds as much as we were, we're going to take you through a haphazard journey through the lives of these people and figure out how their impact exists today. First thing to note, of course, is that where we learn about these two figures is from HEMA. HEMA, or Historical European Martial Arts, is the contemporary study of European martial systems, whose lineage has either evolved beyond recognition, such as Olympic fencing, or for a time had no living practitioners to teach. As you can see, these studies are both academic and athletic in nature, and outside of a few scraps from Greek wrestling and gladiatorial combat, we are primarily looking at the times of the 13th century all the way to about the end of the 19th century. And many of these early writings focused on the weapon that we now call the longsword. Improvements in metal tempering allowed longer sections of steel to resist brittleness and deformity under use, which did allow a longer lever in the sword's handle. This two-handed operation gave the sword the speed and dexterity necessary to serve as both the offensive and defensive tool for a warrior, rather than needing a separate sword and shield. Every part of the sword is designed towards efficiency, from the tapering blade profile to the bezeling within the grip. So our cultural idea of this weapon as a hard, heavy, crashy, bashy thing, which is incredibly brutal and entertaining, is a bit off from the reality. You will see this later in the weapons demo. Although several people from across Europe wrote on the longsword, a massive portion of the writings come from practitioners whose names are lost to time. Much of what we still have comes from Germany and Italy, along with a sprinkling of Spain. And in here, we do find two great candidates for swordmasters, Fiore de Libre and Johannes Lichtenauer. Reminiscent of the ancient master trope Dave mentioned previously, Fiore was a knight and duelist who traveled throughout the Holy Roman Empire to learn swordplay from fencing masters. Frequently, Fiore met people he would call false masters, who not only had nothing to offer Fiore, but in fact Fiore considered them snake oil salesmen. On at least 5 occasions, Fiore challenged these false masters he dissed to duels. Even with sharps and no heavy armor, Fiore said he always won without injury. Now, despite this interpersonal drama, Fiore was favorably viewed among the royal and merchant families. Fiore was briefly responsible for maintaining the armaments for the city of Aquila, after helping the nobles do an insurrection against the Prince Bishop by recruiting a mercenary army. He also then became the court fencing master to the Marquis de Ferrara, and potentially even was a teacher as far as Paris. Now, sometime in the early years of the 1400s, Fiore composed a fencing manual in Italian and Latin called The Flower of Battle. It is worth noting the Italian name of this treatise, Fiore di Battaglia, is a pun on Fiore's own name. There are no historical records to tell us what Fiore viewed of himself, so we can only guess. Many later manuals and treatises bear several strong resemblances to material first seen in the Flower of Battle, and today Fiore's manual is one of the most studied art forms within HEMA organizations across the world. Now, with that in mind, we're going to bounce over to our German practitioner, Johannes Lichtenauer, the Grand Master of German fencing. Okay, well, we can try to look. In truth, we know next to nothing about this German Santa. The only account of his life is from a manuscript by an anonymous author. Master Lichtenauer learnt and mastered the art in a thorough and rightful way, but he did not invent and put together this art. Instead, he traveled and searched many countries while learning and mastering this rightful and true art. That's it. That's really all we have. We don't exactly know when he may have lived, with estimates ranging from the early 1300s to the late 1400s based off when that little snippet could have been written. And the snippet doesn't even give an epitaph
to Lichtenauer, which was very common at the time to denote that someone had passed, so we're not even sure when he may have died. Truly, history has dropped the ball on this one. We do have a better idea, however, of his teachings, based off the legacy of his students describing Lichtenauer as the Grand Master of the German School of Fencing, and he is universally attributed with creating Die Zettel. Die Zettel is normally a brief written text in verse, but here we translate it as the recital. Die Zettel is a poem of rhyming couplets that function both as a mnemonic device for remembering the tenets of swordplay and as a cipher, so those who didn't learn from Lichtenauer would have no idea what they were hearing. While the German school is most prominently known for its development of longsword, it also has detailed operations of pole arms, that's gonna hurt a lot, messers, bucklers, daggers, fighting unarmed, and on a horse. Die Zettel is the foundation used by later stewards of Lichtenauer tradition in their own writings, admittedly to some extreme variance in completeness and fidelity. As these students, who we saw a couple of them at the beginning of this, and Dave also gave some details on their construction, remember this, they follow their master's path by giving us very, very little detail about their lives. Paulus Kahl, who was the student of Hans Stettner that we saw earlier in the scene, wrote a roll call of sword masters within the recent history of the 1480s. While about half of them have been lost to history, the other half have been attributed as establishing German longsword across the entirety of Europe, and are purported to all be direct students of Lichtenauer. Here we see our heroes that we saw, and here is where the ominous Black Forest Brian told us about earlier. No matter how good a fighter Lichtenauer and Fiore may have been, their legacy lies with their students. The writings of some folks like Sigmund Ein Ringek, Otto Jude, and Peter von Danzig help popularize and preserve their master's lineage so they could exist to this day. Fast forwarding 600 years, even today do fencers and scholars learn new material from these masters about what it means to be a warrior, martial artist, and a teacher in a time when your survival depended upon it. This led us to placing these quasi-mythical figures as the soul of our story. I don't mind admitting, Past Mason looks pretty good with that Rogue Steel shirt. Now, we've done a lot of sword talking, which I'm sure everyone loves, but maybe it's a little bit abstract if you've never picked up a sword. And I'm going to guess most people haven't picked up a sword, though maybe our particular audience is more informed, which means maybe this is incredibly abstract. I think we just need to show some stuff. So we're going to go, once again, back into the past, looking at a little demonstration that our dear Mike Lupke and Dave Schneider recorded. Let us venture back into the past.
Okay, we've been talking about historical martial arts for this whole presentation, and you've now probably heard the word Mastercuts enough times that it's lost all meaning, if it ever meant anything to you in the first place. So what I'd like to do now is share with you the 5 Mastercuts at the heart of the German School of Historical Fencing, using them as a brief introduction into this style of fighting as a whole, the underlying principles at play, and the general aesthetic we hope to eventually bring to full-fledged life on stage. Without further ado, let's start with the Wrath Cut. The Wrath Cut counters the common attack of a descending diagonal strike to the shoulder. In it, the fencer simultaneously deflects the incoming strike using the strong part of their blade near the hilt, while also threatening and striking with the part of their blade near the point. It is important that these be done in one action. Another key element of this technique is the footwork. The step moves towards the opponent, but offline and away from the incoming strike, no longer standing where the opponent was targeting them. This movement helps achieve the proper angle for both deflection and attack. Next up, we have the Crooked Cut, a maneuver that showcases the preference for deflecting an incoming attack across its force, rather than meeting it head-on. This can be followed with an immediate counterattack. Or, if the timing and distance are right, this attack can be directed at the opponent's hands, ignoring the incoming blade entirely. This is a versatile technique that can also be used against rising cuts to the ribs rather than just descending strikes to the shoulder. Using a grip that places the thumb against the flat of the blade, the action is rooted in crossing and uncrossing the wrists to move the sword between the fighters, rather than directly towards the opponent. This is why they call it crooked. It also allows for ready use of both edges of the sword in quick succession. You'll note that the footwork movements are similar to those of the Wrathcut. The Thwart Cut protects against strikes to the top of the head and neck, using an action similar to the Crooked Cut, but above the fighter rather than between them. This technique relies on the same principles as the two before it. Like the Wrath Cut, it simultaneously protects and attacks. The simultaneous attack could be a thrust to the throat, or a cut to the side of the head, depending on the situation. In practice, the attack would be a bit more simultaneous. I'm going slow for demonstration's sake here, and doing my best not to whack Dave in the ear. And, like the Crooked Cut, it cuts across the incoming downward strike, rather than trying to meet its energy directly. This is why it's sometimes called the crosswise cut. The fourth master cut is the parting cut. It is the response to an attack to the legs. The technique is to throw a direct strike to the top of the opponent's head, while pulling the leading leg back to avoid being struck at the same time. Now, this technique works because of a simple anatomical and geometrical truth, that since our arms are attached at our shoulders, the targets below the shoulders have an effectively decreased reach the further down the body they go. Because Dave's target is my thigh, and mine is his head, after the parting cut, I'm in range to hit him, but he's not in range to hit me. Finally, we come to the squinting cut. This technique is arguably the most heavily debated and trickiest to pull off. In essence, it is a downward strike with the false edge of the blade going across the body, ending in a fully extended position. It leads into thrusts to the face very nicely, which is why we're demonstrating this one a little more slowly than the others. One of the key principles this showcases is the importance of controlling the center line between the fighters. The act of pressing the sword forward to thrust is sufficient to deflect Dave's blade away from my body, without relying on me pushing side to side at all. Kinda like how a plow moves snow to the side while moving forward. Now, just a reminder. This has been a very surface-level introduction to this material to show you how elements of this historical fighting style differ significantly from the style of swordplay that's very common on stage and screen when using the longsword. We're hoping to use this show as an opportunity to inject some of this martial authenticity into our storytelling, while, obviously, still keeping everybody safe to perform again the next night.
I don't want to ruin what Mike said by saying anything, so I'm just going to give that a second of silence. Okay, now I'm going to ruin it. That was so great, being able to get a visual sense of what we're talking about. One thing that we're really interested in seeing in the future part of this is how each of the 5 members of Fiore's student body could be experts in one of those particular Mastercut techniques, as both the means of showing that Lichtenauer historically would have had a multi-decade history of being a teacher, and like any good teacher, they would be constantly revamping their own material to be more cohesive and holistic and understandable. Be able to get that there, as well as being able to really exemplify each identity of those 5. I'll leave it to you to start thinking about which of those characters fit which Mastercut. Now, friends, countrymen, lovers of swordplay, we are at the very end of this recorded content we want to share with you, this gauntlet that you survived. I think we want to leave you with another one of our exemplified scenes here. We're going to be looking at some different characters today. Some you may have heard the names of, some you may not. So take a second to breathe, fill your water if you haven't had the chance to, and let's go somewhere dark and mysterious. And dark. Okay, go.
A friendly interrogation. A keep in the Alps. Underneath is the dungeon cluttered with barrels and chains. Inside is a cell. Twilight trickles through the slits along the wall. In the room's center, a rough wooden table accompanied by a single stool and holding a cup with unlit candles. One wall is composed of bars and a secured gate, while another houses a bunk with threadbare blankets and a bucket. Lichtenauer stands in the center, dressed in simple clothing, recently ripped and bloodied. They flow through some martial movement semi-consciously, relaxed and uncommitted. Their eyes, however, are meticulously scanning the room. At times, something about the room, a crack in the mortar, a joint in the bars, will warrant physical examination. Afterwards, they return to the center of the room, resuming their movement flow and scanning the room. There is the sound of melodic humming from outside the cell, increasing in volume as footsteps approach. Lichtenauer abruptly stops. As Guard 1 arrives outside the door, peeking into the cell with a lantern. Seeing Lichtenauer, Guard 1 makes some signal to those still outside of view before entering with a plate of food and placing it on the table's corner nearest the door. More footsteps from far away approach, along with a demanding voice asking about financials and the day's schedule. Guard 1, noticing the voice, lights the candles on the table right before Duke William of Carinthia enters. Guard 2 arrives carrying a rough-hewn sack and an empty bucket.
And please tell Jeffrey to have the caviar prepared for me at all times. All times. Oh, Lichtenauer. 3 days alone with only water gave you, I trust, a chance to consider the seriousness of your predicament. For someone with a reputation as historic and spanning as yours, I didn't expect you to be so ordinary.
Rumor has a way of turning the ordinary into the mythic. For all I know, you could be the Iron Baron who's whispered about in the forest villages.
I rule this region with absolute authority and can spare no thought to the whimperings of the rabble. What is said of this Iron Baron?
A monster. Impressive. Leads their force with unquestioned authority. You are not them.
I am not the Iron Baron, but they are an ally of mine. They have agreed to lend me their forces so that we may move north. Thus far, we have washed over the opposition like the tides over sand.
The opposition? You mean farmers and merchants?
Farmer or soldier, if they will not kneel, they will fall. But you touch the point. Tell me, Herr Lichtenauer, why do you think I have brought you here?
So this is a test. It's a poor teacher that tests their students on something they've never been taught.
But you see, I am not a teacher. Now, do you know why you are here?
It would help to know where here is.
Austria, Lichtenauer. I am the Duke of Austria and Carinthia.
Well, it's hard to imagine I'm being held for any crimes, given that you clearly crossed the border into Bavaria to abduct me.
You're not here because of something you've done. You're here because of what you're going to do. For me. You see, my army, while enthusiastic, is not much trained.
Oh, so you need me as a drill master. I had thought you merely wanted me gone from the other side.
Both are of benefit. Our army could use your instruction, true. But we don't need you. We were fast enough to conquer 12 leagues of enemy land with nothing escaping but whispers. We were strong enough to seize the great Johannes Lichtenauer, the most legendary swordsman of the Holy Roman Empire. We are satisfied in knowing that Bavaria's forces will be without you. The only distinction is whether you live through our campaign or die in this cell.
In other lands, a swordmaster on retainer is well paid and respected.
You're not in other lands, though, are you? You're in my lands. Let me be very direct with you. I am not your patron. You are not an artist. You are a tool to be used at my disposal. A honing stone, if you will. My honing stone. And you are going to make my soldiers sharper. You'll do what I tell you, and you'll teach them to do what I want.
I'm not teaching anyone for you.
Such big decisions so quickly. Surely, such a choice requires more time to consider.
There's nothing to consider.
Have you forgotten you're my prisoner? If you need a reminder, I can introduce you to a host of other tools I have at my disposal, designed to help you reconsider such things. Choose carefully, teacher, or I will find ways to make you consider my offer much more deeply. Soon the Iron Baron and I will no longer see your potential usefulness. It is up to you to make yourself valuable enough before then to keep yourself alive. I encourage you to come up with something illuminating to share soon, or I may just get bored and decide to snuff you out. Snuff you out? You know, like the candle?
Duke exits abruptly. Guard 1 steps forward.
Need a light?
If you kindly. Well, does your lord always bluster so?
Not our lord.
We serve the Iron Baron directly.
Oh, some of their loaned soldiers, then. The Iron Baron must have loaned the Duke a great many if you could be spared for guard duty.
The Duke doesn't have enough soldiers to wipe their ass for them.
In quantity or quality.
Then, if I may ask, how potent are those threats?
The Duke can't threaten you directly. It won't be their decision to make.
The Iron Baron, then. It will be their decision to threaten me?
When they arrive. If the Baron finds you useful, you will serve them.
If you don't, they will execute you. Painfully.
Well, I look forward to my sentencing. Until then, I am content.
We've brought you necessities, bread, some dried meat, a fresh bucket.
Oh, what luxury. Your Baron wouldn't waste bread on a prisoner they plan to kill, not with an army to feed.
Well, they wish to see that you needn't suffer, if you do as commanded. If you don't, this might be your last bread.
Then I had best savor it. It's brown and still warm. I take it back. This is luxury indeed. When your Baron arrives, I hope you will pass along my gratitude. Is there fresh water?
The Baron ordered you be given food, not water. If you need some, make your own.
Of course, I'm to be kept alive, not spoiled.
We shall bring water on our next visit.
And no food.
Guard 2 pointedly says nothing, and then exits. Guard 1 follows, but impulsively turns back.
You were doing something when we came in?
I'm sorry, what?
You were doing something when we came in.
Yes, I've found much to amuse me in this sparse room.
A true master of mind could be bound in a box and never notice. Not if there was a thought to think.
True. So, you tell me, what was I thinking of?
You were moving through a sequence.
Was I?
Yes, you were imagining how it worked. It was intricate, something that required subtlety. You weren't fully familiar with it. Something you came across recently? Was it in your fight against Fiore?
Were you there?
I was one of the pikemen who encircled you to prevent your escape.
And not the one whose pike I stole.
No, that was one of Corinthia's soldiers. The Duke had them executed for failure.
It's a poor leader who slaughters their own soldiers for failing to be perfect. No wonder they have so few of them.
Why did you yield so easily?
Come again?
When we captured you, cornered you, it didn't seem you fought hard enough to escape. Why did you yield?
The one I fought, adorned in blue with gold bands whose face was concealed, you say that was Fiore? Fiore dei Liberi?
You know them?
Not by sight, but by reputation. A deadly duelist from the Italian peninsula, sometime tutor to those rich enough to afford Fiore's retainer. The way they moved was as near perfect as I've ever seen. Perhaps they are just better than I am.
They are, but not that much better.
It seems their reputation is well founded. The technique they used was a variation on the roof, adapting for a bit of a height. Well, what would you call this guard?
That's the guard of the hawk or falcon.
Okay, in the German tongue, we call it from the roof. And this one?
Looks like guard of the window. Wow, what do you call it?
The ox. This one is plow.
Fascinating.
You are Italian.
I'm from Trieste.
Interesting. I would have pegged you for somewhere near Friuli.
You have an impressive ear. I have family in Friuli and would visit there often.
My life's taken me many places. Whoever taught you swordplay was of the Italian style. They teach through terms of the nobility, falconry, boar hunting. You have one called the Iron Door, yes?
Yes, this one. You move beautifully through the forms. I wish I could see you do it with a sword in hand.
Give me a sword and you can.
Only if you give your word, you'll teach our troops.
Then it seems we are at an impasse.
Come, senor. You are a natural teacher. Each moment with you is a new lesson.
Oh?
Yes. For every question I ask, you lead me down the road to the answer.
But I didn't tell you the answer.
Because you know that the lesson is better learned when the pupil finds the answer themselves.
The Duke did the same, seeking to see if I knew why I was here. What is the difference between them and me?
They're an idiot.
Well put.
Why won't you accede to the Baron's commands? Share your skill, at least with their elite guard.
Why would I? You make war on my countrymen.
Not I. Well, they will do that, with or without your help. And if you help, they will be stronger. They will win faster. Fewer people die in a lightning strike of overwhelming force than in a protracted grinding war.
You're an idealist. But even an idealist can't believe that better methods of killing will lead to less killing.
I can. I do. And idealists are often proven right.
Show me a man of violence that came to a good end, and I will take them for my teacher.
Is that it then? Do you think that now, at the end, you can become a man of peace?
I've killed many people in my time, with my own hand or through the hands of my students. And as I look back, there's not one that I'm glad is dead.
Perhaps you would feel differently if they were still alive.
Perhaps.
I should go. My compatriot will wonder what has taken so long. Well, Johannes Lichtenauer, if you are judged worthy of more bread, I'll see you tomorrow.
I look forward to it.
I doubt that. This is hardly the amiable chat of friends. You are as on guard as a cornered rabbit.
Or the hawk that sights it. But don't think I didn't enjoy this talk. I get as much out of this as you do.
What makes you think I got anything out of this?
You wouldn't have done it otherwise. I've been a soldier. I know the life isn't that boring.
Fair enough. Until tomorrow, sir.
Until tomorrow. Arrivederci, Signor Fiore.
Guard 1 stops suddenly.
Auf Wiedersehen, Herr Lichtenauer.
Fiore exits. Lichtenauer waits until the footsteps vanish, then approaches a corner of the cell. They kick one bar of the cell with surprising speed, which breaks immediately. Lichtenauer reaches down and pries the broken piece out. They examine its jagged point, test its heft, then replaces it where it had been, camouflaging the break. Lichtenauer returns to the center of the room, resuming their run-through of the fight with Fiore.
Ah, you made it! You made it to the end! Oh my gosh, we have to once again acknowledge the incredible work by those actors. First, we have Molly Thomas as Lichtenauer, Gabby Labatka as Fiore, as Guard 1, Sidney Schwint as Duke William, and Mike as the beloved and memorable Guard 2. If you made it to this point, oh my gosh, thank you so much. This is incredible. We do have a little bit of a Q&A we'd like to do, 30 minutes max. If you haven't gone to the bathroom and you need to, right now is a good time to go. You've probably had a lot of water shots from the tech mess-ups. I'll vamp for you, right? A couple minutes. So go ahead if you need a bathroom break. I wish movies would do that. They would like tell you, hey, this next scene's kind of boring. Like, please, like, go to the bathroom so you can focus and watch the rest of it. That'd be pretty nice. One kill in time a little bit, especially for our folks, because we're going to hear from our writers in just a second. A couple small questions from them that I picked up as we've gone through here. If you are going to peace out, awesome. Thank you so much for sending all this time and attention with us. We have two things I want to draw your attention to. In the description of wherever you're watching this, there is a link to the Six Elements Theater donation page. If you are really passionate about, like, this is so cool and I want to see this somehow exist in the future, you can donate whatever you want to do. However, if you have contributions of the intellectual variety, those are also really appreciated. We have a survey that's available. It's a Google form. There's a bunch of questions on there. Feel free to answer all or one of them to your degree, but we really want to write this for you. We want to create this so that you're interested and you're passionate about going to see this or maybe producing it in the future. So once this is all done, now for you or whenever, just hop in to either or both of those to your pleasure. We would love to hear from you. I've killed a little bit of time here. I know not everyone's back, but that's all right. I'm going to go ahead and bring up our writing team. They're all here today. And let's see if I know how to do this. Oh, look at that. We have most of our people here. So as people are settling back in, briefly, I'm going to introduce everybody. In one corner, I don't know how this looks for y'all, but in the lower right-hand corner of the screen for me, I see Ariel Begley. In the upper middle of the screen, I see Dave Schneider. In the upper right of the screen for me, I see a beautiful cat that represents Brian Watson Jones. Directly below me, or in the lower left, we have Mike Lebke. The one person we're waiting to join us again is going to be Nathaniel Nesham Case. And there he is. Nathaniel Nesham Case, now in the lower left. And I'm me. You've been hearing me talk so much. So, yeah, we're good. Everybody, we've got through this. Thank you so much for joining us this evening live. Yay! Woo! Yeah. So, like I said, we're going to keep this short. We've had a lovely long time with everybody here, but there's just a couple things I want to share out into the world from y'all, because this was such a long process. I mean, when did we start this? December of 2019. This has been a long one. We did not mean it to go this long, but things got in the way. So, let's see here. I'm gonna ask a couple questions that I'm seeing. Once again, if anybody wants to recruit a buddy, just do it. You know how to be respectful. So this is our first question for Mike. Also, just a quick introduction. Once again, Mike Lebke is the fight director for Six Elements Theater. He's a fight director with the Society of American Fight Directors, as well as a certified teacher, and really kind of helps hold the fort in a lot of ways for the stage combat community up here. So it's really lovely to have him here. Mike.
Thank you.
You are a person I talk to a lot. I can't escape you. Truly. And the thing I know about you is you are an incredibly observant person. How you observe and your thoughts come from seeing things in the world that don't work and then trying to reverse engineer why they don't work and then what could fix them. You're a methodical, philosophical type of dude, and that's cool. What did you see in the world that made you start thinking of this story or this idea?
Okay, so like nugget of background information that isn't necessary for the rest of this to click. one of the first things I remembered when I was learning, like in literature classes in like, I think junior high or high school, like I really latched on to the idea of a pastiche and the concept of a piece of fiction explicitly done intentionally in a style that is referential to, or like a send up, like a tribute to a thing. Like that's one of the first like subgenres of literature that I really latched onto and I really enjoyed. But like the problem that I found, I guess, is by being a stage combat teacher, one of the things that I do is I frequently reference pre-existing fight scenes from various forms of fiction, whether it's films or plays or whatever. We usually use them as examples in class. And oftentimes I have the opportunity to, we look into what makes a good scene. If it's a film, it's not just the choreography that makes it good, but like what is the setup for the characters? What's the dialogue? What are the stakes? And the number of times that in my showcasing of here's a really good example scene, I would showcase scenes from frequently like Chinese martial arts movies, things that are sort of the descendants of this long storytelling lineage of Chinese martial arts. It started back in, I think, like wuxia. There's the sort of predecessor to Peking opera, which then eventually transformed into Hong Kong action cinema. And now we have things like the Ip Man franchise with Donnie Yen. And I would see this really cool, like, storytelling through line. They've been telling stories about martial arts for so long. And this is the same places where, Shaolin temples that have had a continuous training lineage for so long. I was exposed to all that. And then I got to see the stark contrast where, like, German longsword's a hobby of mine that I really, really love. But it doesn't have that. Like, part of the practice of German longsword is trying to figure out what the heck a lot of this old stuff means, because there's no one who's an authority who learned from someone who learned from someone who learned from someone to tell you what it means. So it's a sort of a reconstructive element. And so I think the key little spark was the what if there had been a continuous training lineage? What if we hadn't lost that tradition? What would a story told about that look like? And then my brain immediately dove down into sociopolitical things about the difference between the individualist approaches to martial arts in the West and how most martial systems evolved eventually into competition and sport for personal glory, compared to a lot of East Asian cultural norms having more of a collectivist approach to things. And so you see group kata as a practice, or group forms as a thing, and it's more about a thing you do together with people rather than a thing a person trains in, and then the competition overtakes the actual martial art of itself. So like I dove down all of those rabbit holes and ended up here with all of you wonderful people.
I think that's pretty accurate. It was a lot of, what about this? What this? And that kind of kicked off this whirlwind that just only morphed with time. Dave Schneider. Dave, for those who don't know, is a long-time figure within the Minnesota stage combat community, as well within the greater community of the Society of American Fight Directors. Has been a linchpin in a lot of ways, not only being a choreographer and teacher, but also as well as being somebody who has helped support and organize things within stage combat workshops. So he's oftentimes been a role model, whether he wants to be or not, to people looking to become choreographers. We are lucky to have you, Dave, even if you don't agree with me. Dave, a cool thing about Dave is that he actually has a pretty long, explicit history of working within theatrical productions that it's sourced, not just inspired, but sourced from Eastern movement. Through a lot of things, not only as a choreographer, but oftentimes as a performer and as well as a deviser within a devised theater setting. Dave, you're also a big movie buff, as it turns out. What are some of the movies, once we approach this idea to you, what were some of the movies that, like, there were some movies you rattled off immediately, like, this is what that sounds like to me. And that would be so cool if that could be playified or made live through an original stage setting. What were some of those immediate inspirations for you?
Well, I think the first one that probably comes to a lot of people's mind is Seven Samurai, the flick from, I don't remember no dates. Sorry, but that obviously parallels our first scene that we saw today, dealing with the defense of a town, and within the movie they have discussions about is it really worth it to even go to this town? Like, what's the point? Are they paying us? And so they all have their own different perspectives on the whole thing, which also brings in all of those characters that they have different thoughts about what's the worth, whether they can really accomplish something, and you do see some of those tropes, those innate characteristics within that. The other one that comes to mind is Three Outlaw Samurai, which, 7 plus 3 is 10. It's 2 scenes, so 5 apiece. But that one in particular, I like because you get the peasants involved even more. And it comes to a point that the samurai, the titular samurai, want the peasants to take control for themselves, and there's this huge dilemma with them, and how does the peasantry deal with trying to make things better for themselves in response to oppression, which I think is really neat. So those are the two that come to mind most for me. I'm mostly Japanese style of cinema, but there is some Chinese stuff too. So
very cool. Yeah, those were through lines for us when we are trying to grapple around, like, what's this story moment? What could this be? And Dave would offer, well, I think I saw that in a movie like 30 years ago. Not his 30 years ago. Dave's immortal, but movies that were made 30 years ago. So that was really great for him to like give very concrete examples of what we were trying to figure out, which is lovely. Storytelling is eternal in that way. Brian Watson Jones, also known as the Cute Cat. Brian Watson Jones has been many things within the Minnesota community. A longtime actor, producer of works, as well as most prominently a writer. He's written in a variety of forms, but we know him very well for his playwriting. Six Elements specifically has worked with Brian a couple times in the past, so we tend to like what he does, whether he's writing solo or he's trying to corral a bunch of devisers who are doing a bunch of weird, nutty things into something that makes literally any sense for somebody. So we respect Brian for a lot of his storytelling instincts. Brian is also very well versed in folklore and myths across many different cultures, and ever since I've known him, he seems to offer a plethora of those. Brian, what made you think of the Black Forest as as a potential source for myth and fear and danger that is effusing this story?
Well, I mean, it was really not even a thought. It was more of an automatic flow because my ancestry is predominantly European. Big surprise in Minnesota, I know. And the Black Forest is one of those sources of European myth. That, along with obviously Greek myths, which are really well known and followed. But the Black Forest itself, since it was the source of the Grimm brother fairy tales, which is something that not even so much culturally, but individually, everybody starts with their folklore interest with Grimm's fairy tales. That's just how it works. That's what Disney turns into movies, at least until recently when they realized there's a gigantic world filled with really good stories. They mined Grimm's up until then. It's just the sort of thing, something about the moment, maybe the creativity of the people in the world, maybe just the fact that the Grimms were the first ones to say, we really need to write all these down, codify them, and publicize them, and make ourselves famous and rich in the process. No shame on trying to get famous and rich while you're doing something. But something about that just made it one of the core things of folklore in European society and therefore American society as the weird stepchild of Europe. It's so when we started talking about this and when I realized where it was taking place, it was just natural. I had to dig into what Black Forest myth actually was, not the sanitized versions we know about, or even the popularized unsanitized versions we know about, but what actually was talked about during that time period, what it would have been like to be on the ground in one of those villages, what people talked about after a long day of just trying to survive. We still, people as a whole had a need to create, and what did they create? And looking into it, what they created was some really cool stuff, which that's always going to be the fish hook that catches me.
Yeah, there was something so evocative about some of the sources that Brian would share with us throughout that helped. Probably one of the hardest things to do is figure out what the vibe of a story is. It really is something you figure out when you're like playing through it, especially if it's a finished script. So Brian's offerings of the Black Forest mythos really helped us lock into this is what the story is going to feel like. So hard to define, yet so powerful when we started getting a feel for it. Nathaniel Neshin case. Nathaniel is the executive director of Six Elements Theater. You definitely are. No, you're absolutely the executive director of Six Elements Theater. No ambiguity. Longtime member of Six Elements, producer of a very storied and long resume at that. A lot of different things he's produced. Really has a feel for how to kind of put things together here. Also, somebody who brought a very interesting contribution to this in that he was one who really set up to bat and convinced us to set this in a very specific time frame versus doing the ambiguous Romeo and Juliet. This is in the here and now, and we're just going to be anachronistic. He was the one like, no, I think there's a richness by setting this in a very specific time and place. Nathaniel, what do you think is the value of setting us in I think it's exactly 1389 Germania.
86. Yes.
86. Wow. So specific, right? But there's a richness in that specificity. What were that was a major thing you brought in early on. What were you thinking that what do you believe that's going to be helping provide us and bring us as we go forward?
I mean, part of that date selection was a little bit based on possible dates of when these characters were historically alive. But in terms of like actually setting something in a very specific time with very specific historical circumstances, like how far away from the plague are we? How close to a specific war are we in actual history? Even though we are creating a fictional history with all of this gives actors a point to jump off together from. It's especially in a creative process like we're looking at phase 2 being, where the actors are sort of creating more based around the story that we've created. They're creating the actual world, giving them as much as possible so that they have a common language before they even start playing. They have a set of circumstances that they know about with the world that they're living in. That can be very helpful in creating the imaginary circumstances that the audience is actually going to see, even if it doesn't actually match history eventually. The choices that we can make then are very specific and can lead to a better communication from like point A, where we're at now, to point B, which is them creating, to point C, the audience actually enjoying the story.
Word. We obviously all agreed in the end. Ariel Begley is actually a regional artist, has been around a lot of different places from South Dakota and Chicago, and sometimes in Wisconsin, and sometimes in the Twin Cities, like she is right now. So we're very lucky to be able to like secure her presence while we have it. Ariel, along with being a very diligent researcher, is a very experienced multidisciplinary physical theater artist, from things like devised theater and clowning and circus and anything that deals with fire. Crazy, interesting skills all over the round. Also, one of the head administrators for Circus Juventus, which is a very well regarded circus camp. There's a hello. Thank you, hello, F Grande. Uh, so Mike alluded earlier that the phase 2 of this process is going to be much more of a physical creation thing. And as someone who has done that from being a performer to a creator to an organizer of that content, with all of this stuff we've talked about, what do you think we might be doing in our phase 2? What do you think some of the things we might be doing to explore for people who don't know what device theater is?
Yeah, well, thank you, Mason. Also, hi to F Grande from Peru. That's super cool. Thanks for looping in with us. That's awesome. Looking at physically moving forward in this process, one of the things that I've been really drawn to with Six Elements Theater and the way that different work has been approached with the Hound of Cthulhu and other works, but specifically on this was this kind of slow simmer pot approach to the devising of this work. And so being able to kind of approach this almost in the way that, and as a movement performer, you also in devised work, you take a lot of that feeding and impulse from the physical exploration of those moments. So I feel like we've done this really great exploration where we create the first crust, this kind of exploratory space, almost the bubble, you will, of our universe. What is the bubble that we're living within? We've decided that bubble includes a specific year. That bubble includes these specific characters. That bubble includes a certain level of historical reference, and those aspects are going to be part of that. So then now that we've got this first, the bubble that we've created, the next step is to get our some bodies into that stew and see what they create, and then distill from that our story. And so one of the things that I think movement does such an amazing job of is it creates both the ensemble, that core connection that you can see on stage, the theater that is the space between. So it creates the ability to really fill in these characters from that ensemble point while also creating the atmosphere point. So creating the ability to move within that space and live in the body of someone who lives in that time. I feel like this last year especially has been a time where a lot of people have understood the way that trauma might live in your body in a way that you didn't experience or expect. And having these characters having just lived through a plague and through not just any plague, the bubonic plague, and how might that have affected them? And then what does that do with your interactions? And then building the story from there. One of the things that I love about that kind of work is you might not be trying to create a historical, direct, accurate truth, but you create a truth that is so complete because it comes from the ensemble building out, and it builds also out from this big world picture into the atmosphere that's created within it, into the ensemble and the interactions, and then from all of this soup and stew you create your story. And so being able to be a part of that process is awesome, and I look forward to being able to start create the next step of that soup. The movement within it and distilling that, doing etude work where you take, say, the Canterbury Tales, which is a fantastic reference point for people who lived in these times to say, hey, let's explore what this person might be if you were to be that character and see how that lives, and then take that person and put them in front of one of our main characters on the road and what happens there. And it might be a scene that never happens on stage, but having that experience for the actors and having the chance to be that part of the creative process is something that creates truth and new perspectives in a way that is really inspiring to me and so fun.
I love using soup and food analogies for anything artistic. Makes me hungry for art and for soup. So we're getting pretty close to the end. I want to ask one group question for everybody. It's been brought up in passing that we had a different idea for what this was going to be, and then we got hit with a quote-unquote once-in-a-lifetime event that radically forced us to change not only our planning, but even just how we interact with each other. Everything goes in the soup. I love it. So with that,
I love it.
I know. With that, asking the obvious question, how was it for all of you to go kind of unexpectedly jump into a regular, remote, collaborative writing process that is extended for literally over a year by now. Like, what was that like? Because for me, unprecedented is the single word I would say.
I'll go ahead and jump in first. As someone who is not incredibly technically advanced in my home life, trying to figure out how the Zoom works and having to actually buy a camera for my computer. But there are some advantages in that while we're in meeting, I'm actually typing. I find it easier to type, to kind of just free type story ideas. So while we're in meeting, I could actually type out. I think we've all done that at times where we're actually typing up small snippets of scenes and dialogue, and then immediately able to send it to the group. So that there are advantages and disadvantages, but now that we've had a couple of weeks off from the standard Zoom meeting, I do appreciate having my Sundays back.
Talking about how you're not technically advanced. I'm a cat over here.
For me, I think that the biggest boon that I found was the extension of the process. We had the timeline that we had set forth was trying to get a certain level of everything set by early summer, and just the way that we could extend this and still have interaction with each other throughout a longer process, I think has really enriched the story that we were able to create. And the amount of research and the amount of just the amount of creation that we were able to share with each other and bounce ideas off of and let it simmer and then come back to. And I think that might not have happened if we were trying to stick to the same sort of schedule driven process that so many theater shows have to be, because you have a theater booked at X time and you have to fill in that slot with the show that you're creating. Just the extension of that process has been lovely for this.
Yeah, I'll go. It's interesting because it is a double-edged sword. No pun intended, or pun intended. Go for it. Oh, I broke Mason. Good. Because on one side, I'm a physical movement person. I create stories through movement. That's why I'm drawn to devised work so much, because as a movement person and a storyteller, usually you have to put the storytelling first, and the devised work allows you to kind of do that reverse reaction and create in a different way. So doing things by screen, you can't create in a physical space. We couldn't, get the swords out and just play a little bit and see if a scene maybe comes from a little bit of that sword play. And so there were aspects that I missed. On the other hand, I also feel like a lot of the type of work we were doing actually lent itself so much better to this kind of engagement, where it was like, oh, if everyone's on a Google document instead of holding separate scripts around a theater, we can all see editing happening at the same time. Like, and some of that I was familiar with, having done so much. I tend to make my life as hard for myself as possible. So I put myself in long distance relationships with myself all the time. So my ensemble, I've worked with and doing theater and doing circus work and a lot of really high contact physical work. We've often had to do things through long distance because they're in Wisconsin and we're putting together a fire show and we're going to have one night of rehearsal. So like, let's talk it through first and put these pieces. So there was some of that I was able to lean on, which I think helped. I think the biggest difficulty that was also one of the best aspects of the whole thing was both personal life and real life events and world things were not an ignorable thing, and nor should they have been. And so it halted the progress of maybe some of our storytelling, but that halt and that zigzag that we had, I think, also opened up a whole new window of perspectives. It kind of started weaving, I think, our experience a little bit into the storyline as we continued going, and was able to have a little bit more of a personal connection with it. And it was also such an amazing thing to have a tether to theater through all of this, because it's been so hard to have lost so many of those creative endeavors, and to be able to still meet together and be working on this long form creative piece that can have a life after the pandemic and doesn't need to be rushed to like produce in the midst of everything, has been really cool. So
Brian left us. Maybe Brian died. I hope not. Love it. I don't want to cut anybody off if they have any other thoughts. I just want to recognize we're getting towards the end of our time, and we've had some people with us the entire time, which they might actually be crazy. Um, so, uh, moving forward. Thank you all for being here with us. Whether you're here with us now in time, right, on this day of May 21st, or if you're in the future when you see us, you're still with us. And from the bottom of my heart, I cannot express my gratitude for that. Having someone generously give their attention is one of the most beautiful things you can do for a human, especially for humans you don't know, and even for humans you do. So, truly, I appreciate you being here. I have to. We are in the end credit scene, like a Marvel thing right now. So I have to rattle off some credits real quick, super lightning fast, because this could not happen without a whole team of people. The first team you're seeing right now, sans Brian Watson Jones, who once again may or may not have died. The This is our core writing team. They've been here with us since the very beginning, and some of them will be with us in the future. But for now, they have done the brunt of their work, and it's been lovely to have them. And we're going to be blessed to have them in the future if they so wish to join us. The next group of people are the actors. I rattled off their names earlier, so I won't do it right now. I'll put them in the description later. But they were the first people to read these words that we had written. They were our first test to like, does this make any sense? Can this live outside of our collective hive mind brains? Turns out, maybe. Right? They gave us so much, and it's so amazing to have them, and very lucky that they were to give their time and attention to us. So, thank you out there. Finally, we're gonna have next to finally Six Elements Theater, the whole group that's kind of doing this thing. From beginning to end, they've been helping support production, and they will be with us throughout the entirety of this, helping figure out production needs, hiring people, getting and helping get funding, and overall making this thing exist at all. Those people include not only Mike Lepke, Nathaniel Nesh, and Case, and myself, but it also includes Jessica Passaro and George Miller, who've been here the entire time helping us monitor, make sure this broadcast is working, because we knew this was going to be a hot mess. So literally, you would not be able to hear me or see me without them. So thank them or condemn them to your wishes based on your opinion of me. But they're instrumental for the future. But the final people we have to say thank you is yourselves, actually, because theater only exists, like I said earlier, with the relationship of the audience and the artist's imagination shared together in this kind of shared fever dream that is theater. Uh, if you are interested in this beyond just having watched this video, the two most obvious ways you could help is one, there's a survey you could take. There's some questions on there. We would love to hear your thoughts. I know we kind of blazed through a bunch of stuff. There's a lot of info here. If there's questions you wanted to ask, put it in the survey. If there's thoughts you have, we have questions we're asking you. Please fill it out. We want to make this the best version of this play possible, which we can only know if we talk to the people we're offering it. Another way you can, of course, support us is through a monetary donation. Six Elements Theater is a nonprofit organization, so any donation you do is tax deductible, which is lovely when you don't understand your tax situation for the year, as you might have not for last year and this year and maybe for a while. So you can go to that link and go through there, and anything you donate, we will be able to earmark for this production specifically in order to help support making this a reality. Primarily, we make sure we pay our people. is our first priority. To make sure we're all the energy they're giving us, we compensate that appropriately. And anything else after that is to make it look fancy and nice. So you're directly making this thing a reality. That's all the words I really want to say. Thank you all. Thank you all. Also, the people here who joined me. I feel so lucky to have had you all here. Last year sucked. This year kind of started off sucking too, to be honest. And it's not done. For so many people, you have been a thread of hope and joy and artistry that has weathered throughout this storm for me. So I personally have to say my appreciation for that. Thank you all for joining. I'm going to kill this broadcast. Till next time. Take care.
Be
Thank
well.
you.
Bye.
Thank you very much.